It's a great question. Part of that depends on where my parents end up, and there's some other family considerations, and how this house hunting journey in San Diego ends up. I think that long term, being in California, I have my brother lives in California too, and hopefully my parents come here eventually. I think being in California long term is ideal because the weather really is invaluable to me, and I realize that every time I go somewhere else where it's raining for days at a time. Um, but but one thing to notice about I appreciate you saying that about my I guess hustle after earning $1 million. That's great. 4 years ago, $1 million was my fine number, and I was super set on retiring and what I thought was going to be 31, which is in a month from now, and that has simply not come to fruition because of inflation and changing demands and realizing that I'm willing to work, maybe 70% as hard for 10 years longer to have the same quality of life indefinitely rather than cutting my lifestyle in half or more and calling it quits now.
Welcome, millionaires and future millionaires. You're listening to the Millionaires Unveiled podcast, the show where you'll hear the stories and interviews of everyday millionaires. We'll unveil their decisions, their strategies, and their portfolio allocation. Now to your host, Jace Mattinson.
Welcome back to another episode of the Millionaires Unveiled podcast. This is episode number 415.
This is the podcast where we dive deep into the inspiring stories of self-made millionaires from all walks of life. We are your hosts, Jason Stacy, and each week we uncover the strategies, setbacks, and turning points that led these individuals to financial freedom. Whether you're just starting out or looking to level up your wealth building journey, join us as we share the secrets and wisdom from those who have built their fortunes from the ground up. Get ready to learn, be inspired, and take actionable steps towards your own success.
Listening to the Millionaires Unveiled podcast with my dad, Jace Madison, and my mom, Stacy Madison.
Man, we are almost finished with Q2 and well into the summer. Hope everybody is enjoying it and enjoying their summer vacations that may be coming up. If you'd like to be on the show, send us an email, millionairesunveiled@gmail.com. We're always looking for new, great, entertaining guests willing to share their stories. Today on the episode, we've got Corey. He's got a net worth of just over or around $1 million, mostly in real estate in the market and a few other investments. He's young, 31 year old here. So one of our youngest millionaires. Haven't had somebody probably this young on in a while. And works at W-2, but has made some investments in some other spaces and continues to grow his income and his investment portfolio. So going to be a great episode. A lot of great nuggets in here with Corey. And without any further delay, let's get right into the episode with Corey.
Corey, do you want to just give us a lot of your background and what you're up to now?
Sure. Come from Texas and did some stints in the corporate world, and fast forward about 8 to 10 years, and now I'm living in California, still in the corporate world, but delving into some side projects as well.
Well, cool. I want to get into all the details, especially moving from Texas to California. That is what seems to be an unpopular move nowadays. It's usually the opposite. But before we get into all the details, what's your net worth today?
It's about 1.1 million, depending on how you value some real estate.
Awesome. And what is the breakup of the 1 million or 1.1?
Yep, it's about 15 to 20% in cash, about 50% in real estate equity, and then the remainder is in investments in equities between retirement and taxable brokerage.
Okay, so you got kind of a nice diversification there. So on the let's start with the money that is in the market and your tax advantage accounts brokerage. Is most of that in index funds or mutual funds or bonds, or what's the breakup there?
100% ETFs. I don't own any Bitcoin, don't own any bonds. Very, very boring VTI, VTSAX.
And has it always been that way?
I used to, I got granted some stock just as a gift when I was younger, and I looked into the stock picking route, and I just realized I don't have time or interest for that. And then when you think about the odds of outpicking the money managers who do it for a living, I just decided there was no upside to doing it. And it doesn't even give me entertainment. Like a lot of my friends are day traders, and I just don't really see the enjoyment in that. I had trouble going to Vegas for a week and putting $20 on a basketball game, so I figured I was no good for stock picking.
And how long have you been putting money into those accounts?
I started right out of college. So when I got my first job, I opened a Wealthfront account when I was 21 and have been contributing pretty steadily since then. So about 10 years.
And have you maxed out what was maybe a 401k or a Roth during that time period?
I used to max out the 401k and the Roth, and that was all I did. I'd actually put very little in the brokerage when I started. I've since shifted and now kind of just do the match because I like to value flexibility now over some tax advantages later. This year will be an exception to that just because it's a high income year and I'm looking for some tax deductions. But generally speaking, I take the Scott Trench approach of evaluating the flexibility to be able to invest in a business or a house now over some potential tax advantages 40 years from now.
And does that mean you're favoring the Roth with those?
Yeah, so to the extent that I do put in retirement money, it's actually all traditional now just because of my income level and living in California. It used to be 100% Roth and maxing out the Roth, but I've kind of phased out of that and would rather put the money into other things like real estate and business now.
Interesting. So let's shift gears into the real estate. When did you make your first real estate investment?
In March 2021, I bought a rental property in Arkansas, and it was kind of just on a whim. I had talked to a friend about 2 months earlier who said this is what he was doing. I didn't really know much about it, but I felt like it was something I could contribute to and wanted to learn about operationally. So at the time, it was a decent amount of my net worth. It was 10 to 15% of my net worth at the time, and I had a really hard time sleeping when I was buying that, but it turned out to be a very good decision, and I bought quite a bit more since then.
Yeah, why don't you walk us through kind of the next deals that you do in the first one in Arkansas? Where did that take you to the next one and the next one?
Sure. So March 2021, bought a single family home in Arkansas purely as a rental. It's worked out. I still have it. It's a great cash flowing asset. And then September 2021, I'd actually told my friends during that summer that this is kind of what I was doing, and they asked if they could get in a deal with me. So I did a deal with my friend where I kind of manage it, and he put most of the money down. That was a duplex in Arkansas. So now we're up to 3 units in Arkansas. And then actually a month later, October 2021, I bought a condo in San Diego that I planned to house hack. And so bought 4 units in 2021 and then actually didn't do a ton for the next 2 or so years. I invested in a syndication in May 2022 that I'll get to in a second. But then it wasn't until 2024, 2025 that we really accelerated the real estate journey. I actually helped run a kind of an off-market wholesale purchase organization that buys and sells in Arkansas. And since then, we've done about 7 deals. So between buying and selling and flipping a couple of them, we're now up to about 8 units.
Nice. So when you're investing in Arkansas, were you living in California at that time?
Yep. So I've lived in California for the last 5 years. And so in 2021, when I bought the first place, I was living in California. And since then, I've lived in California the whole time.
So what led you to pick Arkansas of all places to start investing, halfway across the country?
Sure. I was living in California in 2021 when I bought the first property, and that actually came from living in Arkansas for a year in 2016, 2017, working for a major food company that needed an office near Walmart, which is headquartered in Bentonville, Arkansas, which is where most of the properties are. And then from there, I just kept buying on-market deals that made sense. Eventually, with interest rates, on-market deals didn't make sense anymore. And so through connections, I found a website that ranks very high on Google. If you search Sell My Home Fast Northwest Arkansas, asked some of the people working there what they were doing with it. They actually said nothing. And so I've kind of taken operations over from there and hired virtual assistants to do some cold calling and do some mailers. And that's kind of what takes a lot of my non-W-2 time now.
Okay, so you had a little bit of a leg up, or at least some understanding of the market that you were investing in with doing some stuff in Arkansas. It wasn't completely on a whim that's where you chose.
Yeah, I actually evaluated looking at other places like the typical Southeast, Alabama, Mississippi, Florida, and places that people invest in if they haven't seen the area. I just didn't have the stomach to do that. And I knew enough people, I knew the area, and so that gave me the kind of confidence I need. It seemed like a totally unconfident decision at the time, but I do feel like knowing the area was helpful.
Gotcha. So at this point, in terms of the real estate, how did you kind of, was it the cash flow challenges and the interest rate environment the last little bit that's led you down a little bit of a different path, or is it just deal prices aren't where you want them, that you're thinking about things differently instead of continuing to buy, single family rentals that get cash flow?
Sure, interest rates definitely changed, obviously making it harder. But I realized after buying 3 deals in 2021 that I was very, very low on cash, and I wanted to keep buying more. And the only way you can kind of make things work is either be very leveraged or take heavy risks or buy off market. And so buying off market seemed to provide the least amount of risk with the most amount of upside. That I that was kind of the only way that I could keep acquiring. I wasn't one of those people who wanted to have raise capital and do syndications. I still don't feel like I'm there, even though I have some experience. I just feel like it's too much pressure relative to what I want to do. I don't have goals of getting 1,000 doors, so this pace of 1 to 2 to 4 units a year is kind of all I need.
Okay, so during this time, have you continued to work a W-2 job the whole time as well?
The entire time. Yep, I've had a W-2 for coming up on 9 years.
Okay. And you talked a little bit earlier about starting in the corporate world. Talk to us a little bit kind of with your career progression and moving, Texas to California, because that's gonna pique the interest of a lot of listeners,
Yeah,
right? Going from
yeah.
a low cost of living area to a higher cost of living area, high tax state from a low tax state, at least on the income side.
Sure. So I actually moved Texas to Arkansas. That was my first year out of college that I mentioned, to California for a stint, and then to Florida, and then to California. So I've actually gone the non-state income tax to state income tax route twice between Texas to Arkansas and then Florida to California. And yeah, it's very humbling, and it forces you to evaluate what you truly value, whether that's good weather or financial gains. For perspective, my first apartment in Arkansas was $375 a month, and then my apartment in California was $2,000 a month. And so it's really taught me the value of being honest with where your money's going and the importance of kind of having a budget and a clear financial picture.
Yeah, talk us through a little bit about the mindset shifts that you've had doing that, and I guess you mentioned getting to a point and really understanding what you value. I mean, did that change as you've made all these moves? Were they career related, or kind of walk us through that? I think it's pretty intriguing.
It has definitely changed. I enjoyed Arkansas, but once you live in San Diego, you realize that the sunshine tax is a real thing and how much weather affects your well-being. And I've also kind of appreciated on a different lens of, my parents are getting older, and I really actually appreciated the episode you just had recently with your parents, because that helped me evaluate the value of having a long-term mindset. Whereas, sure, it's very nice to live in San Diego, but kind of the only way I can do it sustainably is by living beneath my means. And so after I bought that first apartment and then or after I bought that first single family home in Arkansas and then buying the condo a year later, my quality of life has actually decreased because I realized this is kind of the only sustainable way to long term live in San Diego. I'm talking about buying a new house in San Diego that allows me to rent out bedrooms simply because the price of San Diego kind of necessitates that. So I've kind of made the trade off with myself of you can't live on the beach your whole life. My goal is to live on the beach in 30 years and not have to worry about it. And that's kind of required some sacrifices along the way. But there have been sacrifices that I've been willing to make because I spend heavily on things that matter to me, which fortunately don't cost a lot, and don't spend much at all on the other things.
It's interesting to hear someone who recently hit net worth of $1 million say that you feel like I'm still having to live a certain way. I'm having to live beneath my means if I want to live in this area. And you have tons of investments going for you. You're probably cash flowing quite a bit. But to hear the grind is still there is really impressive. So you're talking about, I don't know that I want to live this way. I'm kind of thinking about that in game and my parents getting older. Where do you see yourself moving from here?
It's a great question. Part of that depends on where my parents end up, and there's some other family considerations, and how this house hunting journey in San Diego ends up. I think that long term, being California, I have my brother lives in California too, and hopefully my parents come here eventually. I think being California long term is ideal because the weather really is invaluable to me, and I realize that every time I go somewhere else where it's raining for days at a time. But one thing to notice about, I appreciate you saying that about my I guess, hustle after earning $1 million. That's great. 4 years ago, $1 million was my fine number. And I was super set on retiring in what I thought was going to be 31, which is in a month from now. And that has simply not come to fruition because of inflation and changing demands, and realizing that I'm willing to work, maybe 70% as hard for 10 years longer to have the same quality of life indefinitely, rather than cutting my lifestyle in half or more and calling it quits now. And so I think that this is probably a theme you have with a lot of guests, is that I do get a lot of non-financial value to pursuing businesses and real estate and learning in ways that sure provide a financial gain, but also provide a lot of purpose. And fortunately, those are things that I can do for kind of the rest of my life.
So Corey, hitting $1 million at 30, your FI number, I mean, it's pretty remarkable. In the circle that you hang out in, the friends that you have, are you an anomaly, or is everybody like you?
That's a great question. Um, I think that in the things I listen to and in the books I read, which I guess is a majority of my free time, I'm not an anomaly. There's a lot of people I know that have much more than me. And if you listen to any Bigger Pockets episode, I'm very small potatoes compared to the 27-year-old with 1,000 units. But I think generally speaking, I probably am at the upper echelons of my coworkers, my general friends, and I'm tried to get them on kind of the long-term mindset path that I've embodied. Sometimes that can be tough, but I take a lot of solace in kind of knowing that ultimately I don't really have to. My goal is to not convince them, but to kind of live life on my terms and not stress so much about what other people are thinking, knowing that I have great power and financial flexibility.
Do you see yourself leaving your corporate job at some point?
Definitely. And one of the benefits of reaching this milestone is I'm strongly considering a long-term Australia trip. It's currently booked for 2 weeks, but it may be longer. And that'll be early next year to see the Australian Open, which is something I've always wanted to do. And we'll see how the job progresses over the next 6 to 8 months. But the power of a large emergency fund and patience and a low burn rate is that if I decide that I want to do that for longer than the job allows me to do, then I have options at my disposal.
Is your current job in person, or are you working remotely there in San Diego?
All remote. I would have a hard time ever having to go to an office again.
Okay. And when you originally moved to San Diego, did you move there knowing that you'd get to work remotely, or did you solely move there for the weather and the enjoyment of the beauty that San Diego brings?
Yeah, kind of got the best of both worlds. It was always a remote position. When I came here, there's a branch of a major retailer out here that I got to work with, and it's been remote full time. COVID had no impact on that. Fortunately, I was relocated here and was able to work remote and kind of enjoy the benefits of the weather and the Pacific time and remote work.
At what number do you think you wouldn't have to house hack anymore? What would feel comfortable
Yeah.
there?
That's a good question. I think the Arkansas number is very different than the California number. I definitely would not have to house hack if I moved to Arkansas, which I've considered. But just looking at house numbers last week, in California, you probably need closer to a $3 million net worth to feel comfortable. If I sold everything, you can't buy the average house right now in San Diego for $1 million. And so I'd probably need to be closer to the $2 to $3 million range to feel like I never had to house hack again.
Is that something that you're feeling like it's worth it still at this point? Or is there a certain age you might feel like, I don't know that I really want to have roommates anymore, and I'd like to feel like I own my own space?
Sure. There's a girlfriend in the picture too, so it's not fully my decision, but I definitely, it's not my preference at all. Like, to be clear, I would much rather live alone. When I first moved to San Diego and I lived alone, that was way more comfortable. I lived in a very nice apartment near the beach and it was all good, but that was kind of a short-term enjoyment, right? There was no long-term financial benefits from that. And so I made the trade-off of moving away from the beach, having a roommate and not my own space, and paying way more in order to buy the San Diego condo. That's turned out to be the best financial decision I ever made. So yes, eventually I definitely want to have my own space and a family that occupies that space, not to deal with roommates. But I think that it's an inevitable cost of having to make sacrifices in order to get there. And whether that cost is working very, very long hours at a very stressful job, or having roommates, or not spending money on anything else, I think that it's just it's necessary to make trade-offs in every aspect of life. And so the house hacking and the evaluating and spending significantly less than you earn is the trade-off that I'm prepared to make, rather than a very stressful job having to commute all the time.
I have to say, we have 5 small roommates, and I think that maybe your roommates are more respectful and pay rent. Our roommates,
And
nothing.
that's right.
They don't go to bed when we ask them to.
That's right.
It's interesting to hear you talk about how you made these decisions where you had your own space, and then you're looking back, you're like, oh, this is not good financially. So I'd love to back up a little bit. We kind of breezed over you. I know you went to college because we talked before this. So can you talk a little bit about kind of your career trajectory and then interest in finance? Because it seems like that obviously blossomed as you've made adjustments along the way and kind of backed up in some of your lifestyle as you realize this is really important to me.
Yep. So I grew up in a very traditional job, go to college, get a job, work there for a long time, household. My dad's a very, very hardworking lawyer who was always running around when I was a kid and trying to make commitments happen. And I think that I learned the flexibility early on, the desire to have more flexibility from that, and whether that was financially or otherwise. And so I don't think my interest in finance like really peaked until I just decided to take a personal finance class in college, which I think should absolutely be required and leads into kind of some consulting that I'm doing now that we can get to in a second. Once I took that personal finance class and learned about passive income and the value of financial education, that's really kind of what set things off. And then I've been reading, every morning for 10 years, and I'll give you the classic trope of Rich Dad, Poor Dad as the book that kind of changed my life in that respect of not trading time for money. And I can go down the rabbit hole of books, but I think the general mindset of disconnecting traditional labor and money relationship expectations really allowed me to make strategic decisions that don't just fit the mold, because I've never wanted to fit the mold and have always wanted to have flexibility, because I really, really highly value my time and want to make sure that my life and actions and priorities align with that.
That's awesome. Can you tell us more about your consulting now?
Yes. So it's called Siege Priority Consulting, SIEGE. And the mission is to help people prioritize, optimize, and systematize their core pillars of life, what I define as health, time, attention, and wealth. And it's actually very similar to Sahil Bloom's book that he just came out with, The 5 Types of Wealth. I came out with this probably 4 years ago, so it's just a coincidence that that's how it played out. But I guess the basic premise is helping people determine what their priorities are and making sure that their actions, inputs, and resources align with those priorities. And so I've spoken at schools and colleges and high schools. I have individual clients, and I do some group coaching too. And it's around simple stuff like scheduling and making a budget and a long-term financial plan, and kind of dispelling the myths of complex finance into simple, actionable items.
Is this kind of a passion project, or do you hope to grow this into a main gig?
It is a passion project. I think long term, this is probably something like my retirement job. I think real estate has proven way more fruitful. And so long term, maybe I do some courses and some more traveling and seminars, but I don't think my time and energy right now, because I'm interested more in scaling this real estate stuff. It all ties together. But I think whether it's for money or not, whether it's now or later, I can't imagine a day going by where I'm not learning and trying to share good information about good personal finance habits. One of the reasons I started doing the real estate stuff a little bit more after I started Siege was because I had listened to some people talk about how they wanted to teach and give courses and whatnot, and I learned they didn't really have any credentials. So I feel like it was only fair for me to go out and try to do more and learn more about the pros and cons and mistakes and lessons about the things that I'm trying to teach, so I can be a better teacher and consultant.
What a grind, and what forethought. I'm seeing this trajectory. Okay, I'm maintaining the W-2 as I'm doing that. I'm growing the real estate as I'm doing that. I'm growing this potential consulting thing that can grow into something great when it comes time to leave my corporate job, and really setting yourself up for success. You mentioned that you don't have 1,000 doors. Is that, what's kind of the end game, do you think, with your real estate?
I think the real estate is just a tool in the overall goal of financial flexibility. If I can get $80,000 a year in passive or semi-passive income, I consider that a win. I'm already at Coast Fi where fast forward 30 years, if I don't contribute another dollar retirement, I'll be good. And that takes a lot of weight off my shoulders. And so that I guess what I did in my early 20s, even though that's somewhat of a financial, not regret, but I feel like there was an opportunity cost to me doing that, has given me a lot of cushion now. And so whether it's through real estate or through other business ventures that I'm working on, it doesn't really matter to me how that $80,000 is acquired. I don't need the ego of a number of a door count. This is just a method in the toolbook. I just have found that I'm good at operations, and real estate is a way to exercise those skills in a financially advantageous way.
Did you have any student debt or loans when you graduated college or even after that, outside of the real estate debt?
No, I didn't. And I always tell my parents that's the best gift they ever gave me. And so I guess one message I want to send to listeners is absolutely, I've realized I'm very fortunate by not having student debt. But I know one of the questions you've asked your guests is how do they think about college for their kids? I'm honestly not convinced that college is going to be worth their 4 years or my investment or their investment if they choose to help pay for it. Especially with the way that colleges are going now and different jobs and trades are becoming more valuable than they were 20 years ago. I think one lesson I would suggest that your listeners consider is that I wish that I had kind of focused on this business stuff right out of college rather than waiting 5 or 10 years. And if I could do something like house hack, once a year starting at 18 rather than at 26, that's a massive, massive difference. And so all this to say, I don't want people to think that you need a college degree to get here. Sure, it helps, but I was making $50,000 a year out of college, and active income is not where my wealth has come from. So hopefully the story resonates with people, even though I was fortunate enough to not have student debt out of college.
Has your lifestyle increased at all since you graduated?
Definitely, mostly by the nature of moving from Arkansas via a couple places to San Diego. I mean, that's a sevenfold living cost increase. But besides that, maybe a little bit. But honestly, the things I like doing don't cost much money. I don't really go out to eat a ton. Pickleball is my activity of choice, and that's fairly low cost. And then maybe I travel a little bit more frequently or get nicer Airbnbs rather than staying at hostels if I'm traveling. But generally speaking, I'm fortunate in that the things that I like to do don't cost very much money.
That's awesome. Well, do you have a target net worth at all one day, or something in the future that I know you didn't really mention the doors as from an ego standpoint, but is there something that is still driving you to get to a certain place?
There's a few different things that I'm aspiring to. Number one, if I can get the $80,000 a year in passive income, I feel like I'm pretty good to go. Who knows if that'll change as I get there, but at least for now, that's what I'm thinking about. I guess that equates to a $2 million net worth if you do the 4% rule. And so once I get to $2 million, I'll feel like I'm in a pretty good spot. But generally, I'm really driven by intellectual pursuits and puzzles, and that's really all off-market real estate is. And that's kind of where I spend most of my free time, is trying to figure out how to get off-market deals. And obviously the money's great, but it allows me to exercise my intellectual muscles in ways that I don't really have in other aspects of life. And so I'm kind of taking a lifelong learner's mentality as my goal here. And as the money comes along with it, that's great. I would love to be able to live closer to the beach and a house, but long term, no matter where I'm living, it's the kind of the mental stimulation that's really keeping me going.
In terms of the 80,000 that you want to have passively, is that in addition to having everything paid off, or do you think you can still keep, whether it's a mortgage on primary or something else, and still manage with that?
Doesn't matter to me. I mean, obviously, if I can get the 80,000 before the mortgages are paid off, then that's just bonus, because at the current rate, the mortgages are not going to be paid off for another 25 years. And so if I can hit the 2 million mark in the next 10 years and then have 15 years of that $80,000 a month, that jumps to whatever it is after the mortgages are paid off. That's just bonus. It doesn't really matter to me if I have mortgages or not, especially because most of the mortgages I have are in the 3 to 3.5% range.
What about having a mortgage on a primary residence?
Doesn't really matter to me as long as it factors into the whole calculus. I mean, theoretically, I guess you will have to come back in 7 years when we see what my latest evaluation of the house hack is. Sure, it'd be great not to have a mortgage on the primary, but if you're looking at $1 million home, I'm not prepared at the moment to fork out my entire net worth or even what it is in 10 years, maybe 50% of my net worth just for the sake of not having a mortgage. I think that given the tax benefits and the ability to deduct a lot of the house hack expenses, or even when you're not house hacking, the property tax and whatnot, it doesn't really bother me to have a mortgage knowing that I have this large emergency fund and other sources of assets if I need to pull from them.
Awesome, Quinn. Let's wrap up with some rapid fire questions. What's the most expensive pair of shoes or pants that you purchased?
About $180 New Balance running shoes. Been running a lot lately and had some shin splints that those have fortunately helped with.
Nice. What about the most expensive meal out?
This was tough. I really don't enjoy eating out expensive restaurants, but let's say $200 at a family restaurant on a family vacation.
What about the most expensive trip or experience?
$5,000 trip to Thailand with my cousin and my brother in 2018.
What about the most expensive car?
$20,000 Rogue. It's the car I currently have. I bought it 4 years ago and still going strong.
What was your first I've made it purchase?
Oh, I'm not sure I've had that yet. But let's say that my trip to Australia, we just booked business class seats to Australia in January that were significantly more expensive than the economy seats. So let's go with that.
You paid cash for those instead of using credit card points or anything? Just straight cash?
Well, we did pay points, but I had to pay the upgrade in cash because it was an extra whatever points that I didn't have.
Okay, all right. That's I feel like that's a common upgrade from millionaires that I hear about, especially on a transatlantic or trans-Pacific flight. So
yeah,
you'll have to let me know. I did not pay for the upgrade when we went.
I was gonna say, let us know. We haven't made it yet.
Do you regret not doing that?
We'll find out soon.
Oh, you're taking the trip soon? Okay.
No, we went to Australia a little while ago, and it was our first trip after we've had kids together without kids. And I fly business and first when I get upgraded. I don't know that I've ever bought that ticket. And I think that jaded me a little bit and actually spending the money to do it. So when we went to Australia, we did not. We just dealt with where we were sitting, which at the time, I don't know. I didn't really care, I guess. But
I was just happy not to have kids on.
Yeah,
great. It felt like first class.
But this next time around, we are going on a different trip, and I did pay for one of the ways where I thought it was going to be more difficult for us to sleep, and it was important for us to adjust schedules. With points, though, I did not pay any cash. It just was all points. So I'd been saving them up for a long time for the option of being able to do that. But I don't know that we regretted it not doing it the first time around. But
I'll get back to you.
Yeah, we'll have to see you, check in with you. What was the key lesson you learned from childhood?
My parents gave me the Dave Ramsey accounting method when I was like 12. And so I got 10 cents for making my bed or 50 cents for taking the dog for a walk. And so knowing that money wasn't guaranteed and my allowance wasn't just a given was a very helpful concept to know that it ties my input to my output, whether linear or otherwise. And so that really kind of helped avoid the entitlement trap that I could have easily fallen into if the allowance showed up every month.
What's one monthly expense that you would never cut even if it got ridiculous?
Give me a couple seconds on that one. You can cut this part, but ChatGPT gave me a list of 45 questions from your previous episodes. That was not on there.
That's awesome. I love it.
So give me a second. Probably a gym membership specifically for a sauna. So a sauna is like a absolute life changer for me. And so I'm considering buying my own sauna for my very small condo, and it would be worth it even if it was in the thousands of dollars. How
much do you pay for that membership? Just curious.
I don't pay much at all. it's $20 a month, but it has a sauna. But even if it became hundreds or even 1,000 a month, I would strongly consider it because a sauna has a massive impact on my well-being.
That's awesome. How did you make your first buck?
I was a T-ball umpire when I was 12. So I played baseball my whole life and figured I could be out there in the sunshine and enjoyed my $8 an hour.
How much of your financial situation, I guess now you're on the podcast, so she may know, but how much did you divulge to your girlfriend, and maybe at what point did you start divulging your financial situation and mindset to her?
That's a great question. I think it was very clear early on that I was financially minded and that it was important to me. Those are ongoing conversations. She knows more or less everything about my financial life because I feel like that's important. In my opinion, I did it very early on, and I think it's important to do it because I think it's an important part of a relationship because it's the nature of what you're allowed to do together and separately. And so I would suggest that people do it as early as possible.
What money lesson took you the longest to learn?
I think the middle class trap, as Scott Trench calls it, of not maxing out your 401k and having a ton of home equity isn't always the best thing. This fact that I now favor financial flexibility rather than tax optimization took me probably 6 years to wrap my head around because I figured I would love to not have to pay tax on this money ever again in a retirement account. But it took me buying my first property or two to realize the power of leverage and compound growth in ways that are just not matchable with traditional retirement accounts or financial advice.
On that note, what do you think is the most overrated financial advice that you hear or hear of other people giving other people?
Buy Bitcoin. I don't own a single Bitcoin. I had this conversation with a couple of friends a couple of days ago, and I tell my clients that I don't own a single Bitcoin just so they know that I'm not kidding with them. I only buy income producing assets, and I am honest to myself about the other things being liabilities. I know I sound like Robert Kiyosaki, but I truly believe that the opportunity cost of those things is usually understated.
What was your GPA in college or high school?
It was a 4.0 in high school and it was a 3.99 in college, and I'll be the first to tell you that I took it way too seriously for those 8 years.
What's the dumbest thing that you've ever wasted money on?
I didn't know it at the time, but I'm the kind of guy that books when Southwest has a sale. I'll buy whatever $2,000 of Southwest gift cards from Costco, and then buy all the possible flights I may need for the year, just to lock in the best price. And I did the same thing with Airbnbs. Apparently, Airbnb a couple years ago had a limit on the amount of refundable bookings you can make. I didn't know that at the time, so I booked $2,000 of Airbnb, and then when I tried to cancel them before the cancellation deadline, lost all of them because they said you can only have so many cancelable Airbnbs and still get a refund. That policy has since changed, and I'd like to think I have some credit in that policy change. But at the time, it was $2,000 lost from what I thought was a fair game purchase.
Dang. Yeah, that'll burn. What's a closely held belief that you once had that you recently changed your mind on?
Sleep. I used to grind and get up super, super early. And ever since getting a Whoop and a Garmin that tracks my sleep, and reading Peter Attia and listening to all the people that talk about how big sleep is, I really, truly believe in that now. So I now prioritize my sleep and don't get up as early as I used to. I'm still a morning person, but don't do it just for the kind of the sake of saying I'm doing it. I really try to prioritize healthy sleep hygiene.
What's the best financial decision you've ever made?
Definitely buying my San Diego condo, not just because it was a 2.87% interest rate, but because of the massive leverage and appreciation. I know one of your other questions is what percent of it is luck versus skill. That was definitely a little bit of both. The fact that I had some savings and was able to pull the trigger on that was skill, but the fact that I bought it at 2021, the lowest possible interest rates in a market that was about to rocket ship, was total luck. So through a combination of both, that has proved to pay probably tenfold what I paid for it.
You're so prepared for this interview. I'm afraid you're going to start asking us questions.
I actually do have questions for you that may not be part of the podcast, but I'm happy to ask you questions.
Any last words of advice for somebody who's just starting out on their journey?
Yeah, I say this to a lot of high schoolers and college kids that are kind of getting started on their financial journey. But I think people should think in 5-year and 10-year plus increments, not in weeks or even months. People ask me all the time when I'm talking about stock investing, like, don't you think it's a bad time to invest or whatnot? And they say, what's the market doing now? And I tell them, I don't know and I don't care, because think of the long-term trends. I think Naval Ravikant and Morgan Housel both have the same mindset of playing long-term games with long-term people, and I think that applies to your money as well. So my formula that I kind of share is that having a large emergency fund and a low spend rate, and then leverage, smart assets, and patience is almost a guaranteed way to be immensely financially successful. And all of those things are in your control. And so the biggest one of which is patience. And so I would just reiterate that I came out of college without any debt, and I was very fortunate to have that, but I didn't make six figures for the first 7 years of my career. I wasn't a trust fund baby. I had no inheritance. All these things that I've done are repeatable. Sure, they had a little bit of luck, but all the decisions that I've made anybody can do it. I'm not any special guru, then I'm not telling you to buy Bitcoin, because that doesn't fall into any of those kind of 4 factors of that formula. So patience is the biggest one, and have a long-term vision, and you'll do very well.
Awesome. That's Corey with a net worth of $1.1 million. Thanks for on the show today.
Sure. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for listening to the Millionaires Unveiled podcast with Jace Mattinson. For more stories, investment opportunities, and information, check out our website, millionairesunveiled.com. See you next time when you'll hear from another everyday millionaire.